My name is Bertha Anderson, and I'm 29 years old. The ache in my lower back was a constant reminder of the life I'd built, or rather the life I'd been building for someone else. 8 hours a day hunched over legal files at the law firm, followed by 5 hours pouring drinks for strangers who never remembered my name. Each shift bled into the next until the weeks became years. All for him, for Connor. I told myself it was worth it. Every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every blister on my feet. It was an investment. Our future was supposed to be the return. The sugar-sweet scent of fondant filled the bakery as Maria slid the cake box across the counter toward me. "She's going to love it," she said warmly, not knowing that the she in my life was actually a he. Connor, my boyfriend of 7 years, my partner in ramen noodles and survival. I managed a tired smile and nodded. I hope so. The cake was decorated in looping silver and blue icing. Dr. Connor, we did it. The we mattered to me. It had always been us. As I buckled the cake box into the passenger seat of my beat-up Corolla, a memory rose unbidden. Sitting on the floor of his dorm room years ago, both of us exhausted eating instant noodles while Connor buried himself in organic chemistry. He had sighed, head heavy against my shoulder, whispering, "Med school is impossible for people like us. My parents can't afford it. Yours can't either." And I had wrapped my arm around him and said firmly, "I've got you. You carry the books. I'll carry the weight. Deal." He'd looked at me then with teary determination and whispered back, "Deal." That deal became my whole life. The paralegal job paid for health insurance. The bar shifts paid cash that went straight into Connor's savings. MCAT prep courses, application fees, tuition deposits. We moved into a tiny apartment with walls thin enough to hear every argument of the neighbors, but I didn't care. Home was where Connor was. I ground myself down into survival mode, all so he could thrive. I stopped buying new clothes, stopped remembering what hobbies felt like. But every time he passed an exam or came home glowing from his rotations, I felt pride swell in my chest. My exhaustion meant his progress. My sacrifice meant his future. And tonight, graduation night, it was supposed to pay off. I bought a bottle of champagne that cost more than my weekly groceries. The cork wasn't just a cork, it was a promise, a celebration of everything we had endured together. My arms were full of our future when I walked into our apartment. But something was wrong. The apartment was dark blinds, still closed. No sign of cap and gown, no sign of Connor, just silence. A knot of unease twisted in my stomach. I set the cake carefully on the counter, the champagne beside it. An hour later, the door finally opened. I leapt up from the couch, a smile ready to burst onto my face. And then it froze. Connor wasn't wearing his cap and gown. He wasn't carrying flowers or laughter or the kind of joy I had been bracing for all day. Instead, he wore a sleek black suit I'd never seen before, his hair styled, his shoes polished. He looked older, colder, expensive. His eyes flicked from the cake to me, and for a fleeting second I swore I saw pity there. "Bertha," he said, voice measured and practiced, "we need to talk. Sit down." My smile faltered. I sat slowly back on the couch. He didn't sit beside me. He stood tall, like a prosecutor before a guilty verdict. He gestured vaguely to the counter. "This is sweet. Really it is. But it's just a symbol of everything that's wrong." My throat tightened. "Wrong, Connor. It's your graduation day. I thought Where were you?" He ignored the question. His tone softened, which only made it sharper. "I've outgrown this, Bertha. This apartment. This life. Us." The words shattered inside me like glass. "What are you talking about?" He looked at me like I was something small, something clinging. "You're still here. Still. Stuck. 2 jobs, tired all the time. My world is expanding, Bertha. I'm a doctor now. I need to be with someone who's already where I'm going, not someone who's still here." He said here as though it was a disease. "Who," the word scraped out of me, barely audible. A faint smile touched his lips. "Dr. Evans. My attending. He understands me. He moves in the circles I belong in." I'd heard the name, mid-40s, charismatic, wealthy, dangerous in the way men are when they know they can have whatever they want. Connor took a step closer, not with tenderness but with finality. "It's not your fault. You're a good woman. You always have been. But you're financially boring, safe, predictable. I need more. I deserve more." Financially boring. 7 years of sacrifice of broken backs and second shifts of ramen dinners and secondhand clothes reduced to 2 words. Financially boring. I stared at him, searching for the boy who once believed in we. All I saw was a stranger drunk on a new world that had no room for me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. My silence was colder than any words I could have said. He faltered, thrown off by my calm. He had expected drama, perhaps even a scene that would justify his betrayal. But I gave him nothing. "I'll be staying at Sarah's tonight," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. "I'll come for my things later." The door clicked shut behind him. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than grief. I looked at the cake, its silver blue letters glowing faintly under the kitchen light. We did it. No, I realized, staring at it with a cold clarity that made my chest ache. I did it. And he left anyway. The deal we'd made all those years ago was broken, but the weight I carried was still mine. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, it was time I carried it for myself. I didn't sleep that night. The cake sat on the counter like a cruel joke, its silver blue icing glowing faintly in the dark. Every time I closed my eyes, Connor's words replayed, "financially boring," a phrase sharp enough to slice open 7 years of devotion. But I didn't scream. I didn't smash the champagne bottle against the wall. My rage burned differently, quiet, precise, like a scalpel instead of a hammer. By dawn, my decision was clear. I opened the closet and pulled down a worn duffel bag. No sentiment, no clutter. I packed jeans, a few t-shirts, my one good suit for court socks, underwear, and my toiletries. My father's old watch went into the side pocket, along with my passport and social security card. Everything else, the life I'd built around Connor's ambitions, could rot in that apartment. The room smelled faintly of his cologne, the expensive kind he'd started wearing in med school. Gifted by his mentor, Dr. Evans, it stung my nose, now artificial and hollow. I sat at the desk, opened my laptop, and logged into our joint bank account. 7 years of work of bar tips slid into an envelope of paychecks carefully split between rent and tuition. The balance blinked back at me. $47,812.33. My hands didn't shake as I divided it evenly. $23,906.16 transferred into my personal savings. Not a penny more. I wasn't a thief. This was simply accounting, a final tally of what my love and labor had cost. I wrote a note on plain paper, my handwriting steady. Connor, I've taken my half of the savings. My portion of the rent is paid through the end of the month. You can keep the deposit. Bertha. No accusations, no pleas, just facts. I left the note beside the cake, evidence of what we were, proof of how much I had believed. Next came the lease. I called our landlord Frank, a decent man with a tired voice. He answered groggily. "Frank, it's Bertha Anderson. Sorry to call so early. I need to break the lease effective immediately. Keep the deposit. Consider it my penalty." There was silence, then concern. "Everything all right, Bertha?" My voice came out flat, steady. "No, but it will be." I hung up before he could press further. One by one, I severed the small threads of our shared life. Netflix, Amazon, Hulu. All accounts, with both our names attached. I removed mine, changed passwords to what belonged solely to me. It was tedious, clinical, like dismantling a machine. And then I zipped up the duffel bag. The apartment looked different suddenly. Not like home, but like a stage set after the play had ended. The props were still there, the couch, the kitchen counter, the photos on the wall, but the story had already collapsed. I slipped my key into the mailbox on my way out. The morning air was sharp against my skin, cool and clean. I carried only the duffel bag, no longer weighed down by the invisible chains I had wrapped around myself for years. I checked into a cheap, extended-stay motel on the edge of the city. The room smelled faintly of bleach and cigarettes, the kind of place people stayed when they were running from something. It suited me perfectly. The first 2 days I did nothing but sleep. 14 hours at a stretch, waking only to grab greasy takeout or sip water from flimsy plastic cups. My body was shutting down from years of exhaustion, finally reclaiming what it had been denied. When I wasn't sleeping, I stared at the ceiling. I didn't miss him. Not really. The man I loved had already disappeared months ago, replaced by a version of Connor who looked at me like I was dead weight. What I grieved wasn't him. It was the we that had never truly existed. On the third morning, I sat on the edge of the stiff motel bed, the duffel bag at my feet. The silence pressed in, but this silence was different from the one he left me with. This silence was mine. And somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered, "This isn't the end. It's the beginning." The motel's bleach-stained walls became unbearable after a week. I couldn't keep living in a room that reeked of other people's regrets. So I drove. No destination in mind, just the highway unfurling in front of me, each mile stretching the distance between me and the life I'd burned down. City sprawl gave way to rolling hills, then thick forests. I rolled the windows down, the wind whipping my hair loose, carrying away the stale air of the motel and the ghost of Connor's cologne. For the first time in years, I could actually breathe. Hours later, I stopped at a small town diner with chipped red booths and a waitress who called me Hun. I ordered black coffee, my hands still restless. On the counter beside me lay a real estate magazine, its pages dog-eared. A red circle marked one listing: secluded fixer-upper cabin. Privacy. Potential. The price made me blink. It was almost identical to the number glowing in my savings account. Something shifted in my chest. A spark. I asked the waitress about it, and she nodded toward a gravel road just a few miles down. Oh, that place. Old cabin in the woods. Roofs, sagging windows boarded up. But the land's quiet. Real quiet. Quiet. The word wrapped around me like a promise. I drove out the road, crunching under my tires as the world seemed to swallow me whole. When the trees parted there, it was a small cabin crouched at the end of the drive, weathered and worn, but standing. The roof sagged, one window was covered with plywood, the porch tilted slightly like a drunk trying to steady himself. But behind it stretched 5 acres of woods, a creek murmuring softly just beyond the trees. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't polished, but it was mine the second I laid eyes on it. The opposite of Connor's world of prestige and polished suits. The opposite of being financially boring. This place was alive in its imperfection. I called the number listed. My voice shook a little as I made the offer. By the next day, it was mine. The following weeks blurred into something both exhausting and liberating. Mornings began with coffee on the crooked porch, listening to wind sift through pines. Days were spent hammering, patching, sanding. YouTube tutorials became my new professors, teaching me how to fix a leak, replace. Floorboards hang a door. My body ached in ways it hadn't since those double shift years, but this ache was different. This ache belonged to me. Nights were for simple meals and old books, the kind I'd abandoned back when my life revolved around Connor's study schedule. I fell asleep to the chirp of crickets instead of the buzz of neon signs outside our apartment. The silence here wasn't heavy, like it had been that night in the apartment. It wasn't suffocating. It was restorative. I began to see myself again, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the years of carrying someone else's dream. Months passed. My phone barely worked out here, 1 bar of service if I stood on a rock near the creek. I didn't stand on it often. But one evening, curiosity tugged at me, and I checked my messages. A text blinked on the screen. Sarah Bertha Connor's really upset. He didn't mean it. You know how he gets under stress. Dr. Evans is a jerk. Can you just call him? I stared at the words. Once they would have sent me spiraling, heart-racing hands, trembling desperate to patch things up. Now it felt like reading a stranger's misdelivered mail. I blocked the number, slipped the phone back into my pocket, went back to sanding the porch railing. The world was finally quiet again. Yet sometimes at night, lying in bed with the sound of the creek drifting through the cracked window, I wondered. Not about Connor, but about myself. Had I been too silent that night? Too calm? Had my refusal to fight been strength or cowardice? The thought lingered a shadow in the corner of the room. But then morning would come, the forest bathed in gold, and I would feel it again, the steady thrum of something stronger than revenge or regret. Peace. A peace that terrified Connor, a peace he would soon try to shatter. 6 months into my new life at the cabin, the silence broke. It was late afternoons. I'd just come back from hauling lumber in town when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Normally, I ignored it. Reception here was patchy, unreliable, but I was waiting on a call from the lumberyard, so I answered. The voice on the other end was fractured wet with tears. Bertha, oh God, Bertha. Connor. My breath stilled, though my hammer remained in my hand. His voice was distorted, a ghost echo of the man who once told me he couldn't live without me. I made a huge mistake, he sobbed. Evans. He was using me. It was all a game. He's done this with other residents. The hospital found out there was an investigation. I could lose everything. Please, I need you. You were always my rock. I leaned against the cabin door frame, staring at the forest, as his words tumbled over themselves, a frantic jumble of self-pity and panic. I felt nothing. No anger, no vindication, no sweet taste of revenge. Only a detached curiosity, like watching a play I'd already read the ending to. I pulled the phone away from my ear, ended the call, and pressed block number. 90 seconds. That was all the space I gave his downfall. Weeks later, another call came. A different number. I picked up without thinking. "Why won't you answer me?" His voice was thinner now, threaded with hysteria. "Do you have any idea what I'm going through? Evans destroyed me. The board is after me. My reputation is ruined. I need your support after everything I did for us, for our future." That last line stopped me cold. Everything he did for us. The audacity of it. The years of my double shifts, the exhaustion that carved hollows under my eyes, the savings I'd built, all rewritten by his desperation into a story where he was the hero. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my arm and spoke at last, my voice calm and flat, cutting sharper than any scream. "There is no us, Connor. You made that clear." A silence stretched heavy and awkward. I didn't give him the chance to reply. I hung up, blocked the number. For a while I expected guilt to creep in, or pity. But instead, the silence that followed felt cleaner, sharper, more absolute than before. It was like scrubbing out the last traces of mildew from a wall. Once gone, you wondered how you'd ever lived with it. And yet, Connor wasn't finished. A month later, I returned from town to find another voicemail. His voice was calmer this time, rehearsed. "Bertha, please, we had 7 years. I know I messed up, but we can still have that life we dreamed of. I was stupid. I was blinded. Just call me back, please." I deleted it before it finished playing. That night, as I sat on the porch, the woods heavy with cicadas, I realized something. Connor wasn't chasing me. He was chasing what I had always given him: stability, a rock to cling to when his shiny, new world collapsed. But I wasn't a rock anymore. I was a river, and rivers carve their own path. A year after I walked out of that apartment, an ivory envelope arrived at my P.O. box in town, the kind with calligraphy so careful it looked painted. "Jake and Amelia request the honor of your presence at their wedding. Old friends from college. People I hadn't seen since my world shrank down to nothing but Connor's ambition." For days I debated throwing it away, but something inside me whispered it was time. The vineyard gleamed under late summer sun. White linens fluttered on tables. Guests laughed over glasses of wine that cost more than my monthly groceries back then. I wore my one good suit, tailored enough to still fit. At first I felt like an imposter, as though everyone could see the girl who once dragged herself through back-to-back bar shifts. But then I saw Jake beaming at Amelia as she walked down the aisle, and my unease melted. Love wasn't supposed to feel like sacrifice. It was supposed to feel like that. I was nursing a whiskey at the reception when I sensed someone at my elbow. "Bertha." His voice. I turned. Connor stood there holding a glass of wine too tightly. His once polished confidence was gone. The suit he wore looked borrowed, his face thinner, older. His eyes were ringed with sleepless shadows. He forced a fragile smile. "You look good." I gave a single neutral nod. "Connor." Silence stretched between us, taut as wire. He rushed to fill it. "I'm so sorry. About everything. Evans, he manipulated me. Love-bombed me. It all fell apart. I lost the hospital, the job, the respect. I was stupid." His words tumbled out, rehearsed, polished excuses wrapped in regret. "But we had a plan, Bertha. We can still have that life. You and me. We can start again." I took a slow sip of my whiskey, said nothing, just let the silence sharpen. His composure faltered. "Aren't you going to say anything? I need you. You were always my anchor." Finally, I looked at him. Really looked. The desperation etched into every line of his face, the fear behind his words. And I felt nothing, not anger, not longing, just distance. "That life," I said quietly, "was built on my exhaustion. This one," I gestured toward the rolling hills beyond the vineyard, "is built on my peace." He blinked, confusion flickering. Peace. He said the word like it was foreign, like a language he'd never learned. "I bought a cabin." I continued conversational, almost light. 5 acres of forest. No reception. Quiet. His grip tightened on the glass. This wasn't the script he'd prepared for. I was supposed to break to forgive, or at least rage. Not this. Never this calm detachment. "What happened with you and your career?" I asked evenly. "That's a professional matter. It has nothing to do with me." His face crumpled. The dam of his composure broke, his voice rising sharp and shrill, cutting through the soft music of the reception. "Nothing to do with you. We were together for 7 years. How can you be so cold?" I held his gaze unflinching. "You ended that the day you graduated. You said you'd outgrown me. Remember?" His lips parted, but no words came. I let the silence hang, then added softly, but with finality, "Turns out you were right." I finished my whiskey, set the empty glass on a passing tray, and gave him one last glance, not of longing, not of hatred, but of dismissal. I hope you figure your situation out. Excuse me. I turned and walked away, slipping into the crowd of laughter and music. I didn't look back. The sun streamed in through the wide windows, bathing the vineyard in gold. I thought of my cabin waiting for me, the new door I'd planned to hang that weekend. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was already home. Back at the cabin, I sat on the porch with a chipped mug of coffee warming my hands. The morning light filtered through the pines, scattering gold across the creek that wound lazily behind the house. A year ago, I had walked out of that apartment with nothing but a duffel bag and half of our savings. A year ago, I had stood in a motel room, hollowed out by betrayal. Now the air I breathed felt different, cleaner, freer mine. I thought of the cake, the blue and silver icing, spelling out, "We did it. We never did. I did. I carried the weight. I paid the price. I survived the collapse." Connor's downfall has been loud calls, voicemails, desperate confrontations. My recovery had been quiet, unseen, steady. And that's the difference. His world crumbled when the applause stopped. Mine began when the silence settled. I leaned back, listening to the forest hum. This life was smaller than the one I'd once pictured. No big city. No prestigious career partner. No glossy apartment with a view. But it was richer. Here my hands built things that lasted. A patched roof, a new oak door. Meals cooked, not because someone needed me to keep them going, but because I was hungry, because I wanted to. Here I remembered the hobbies I'd buried, sketching reading novels late into the night, singing softly while chopping vegetables. Here I wasn't anyone's safety net. I was simply myself. Sometimes when the wind carried a certain chill, I thought of Connor. Not with bitterness. Those flames had burned out long ago, but with clarity. He had been a lesson, not a destiny. A mirror showing me how much I could give and how dangerous it was to give it all away. I wondered if he ever thought of me, if he ever replayed that night at the vineyard, the way I dismissed him with nothing but calm truth. But then I realized it didn't matter. His story had ended where mine began. As the sun climbed higher, I took another sip of coffee and smiled faintly. The woman who once thought she was financially boring had built a life more extraordinary than he could ever understand. Not extraordinary in prestige or status, but in peace, in freedom, in the quiet joy of waking up each morning and knowing the day belonged only to her. And that was enough, more than enough. 7 years of sacrifice had taught me how to endure. His betrayal had taught me how to let go. But this life, this cabin, these woods, this silence, this was teaching me how to live.